This is the weekly wrap-up from the Conversation Project. I'm Jay Cleveland Payne, and what I'm going to give for you in this podcast is the top 10 stories that we presented to you over the past week in our presentations called the Things You Might Have Heard. Well, technically, it's the top 10 stories from that. It's actually top 10 stories per the pure numbers. Now, as I explain quickly, what we do on our daily show, which is Things You Might Have Heard, we give you top stories from a batch of top stories, if you will, and select the ones that make the bigger narrative, the ones that are most sort of conversational in the batch. For here, we're not going to do any of those moving around things. So for Monday, for examples, we give you 10 stories from the top 30 stories of the weekend. And that's 10 stories out of 30. Today, we're going to give you the top 10 stories purely by the numbers. So some of the stories that you'll hear here, well, were not covered last week during the actual Monday through Friday deals because they just weren't not ones I picked out of the top stories. And it's fine, but some of the stories just based on the numbers of what was actually number one on the week, and a week that we still had issues with the numbers as we were still semi-banned from Facebook and Twitter, gave us some of the things that the more conversational ones as opposed to the ones that were more analytical that were here. But you will get it right here from us, the top 10 stories per the numbers of your conversational engagement, what you engage with for the week. We're also going to give you the stories that I call the also rans, stories going from 11 through 15. Not quite top 10 material, obviously, but still relevant enough to be important enough to talk about so you have some context. And for some true context, we have the story at the very bottom of the list for this week. That story happens to be story number 204. Like I said, we had some issues getting some things posted, so we have a few less stories here, but 204 distinct different stories posted this week. The story at the very bottom, the almost irrelevant story of the week. It's irrelevant because you guys didn't get much attention to it. And so it's almost, but it's still on the list. So that's where we give that name there. This all leads to another podcast we release on Saturdays. The 24th of June is the day we're doing this episode, and the next one called The Story of the Week, where we'll pick one of those top 10 stories and expound on that in greater detail, giving more details on something. And you may be surprised which top story it is. I was surprised when we picked it out going through the process. We'll explain that in the other process. But let's get into the important part about this one right here, which is the 10 stories that you literally said by numbers, were truly the most conversational. Reach out to me via email, the show itself, at theconversationinbox@gmail.com, me personally at jclevelandpayne@gmail.com, and the website, of course, this is theconversationproject.com. Very special promo this week, very special for the promotion in the sponsor. We'll talk about that in a bit, and, because we have to do that type of stuff. But right now, let's get into the headlines for the week that you said were the most conversational based on pure engagement numbers and no shenanigans by me. Starting off at number 10, Geraldo Rivera says he will exit Fox News The Five. Yahoo News' Entertainment put this up there. I'm pretty sure this was actually a actual story they wrote for this one. Actually, no, I'm looking at the notes. It was something they pulled because they're an aggregator, like I am, from Variety. So the veteran will leave the set as the liberal panelist for The Five, ceding that ground to the main names of Jessica Tarloff and Harold Ford Jr. Rivera, or Jerry Rivers as I like to call him, it posted that he's leaving The Five. His last scheduled show is going to be the 30th of June, looks like, but he's still going to be on Fox TV. You've not gotten rid of Geraldo that easily. He's going to be a editor at large, correspondent at large, to pop up and talk about things here or there, but he's not going to stay for his regular couple days a week on The Five show. Now, Rivera, Tarloff, Ford, and Jeannie Pirro, who is not one of the liberals, made their official grouping members of The Five back in January of last year to join the cast. The show is viewed as a sort of dinner table discussion show that airs a range of opinions. Now, it's basically The View, but without a bunch of women, or outnumbered, except it's instead 4 women and a guy, or any other chat show that you see that doesn't do the cooking segments and the whatnot and whatever that happens. It's a boilerplate show, which is what it is. It just happens to be a boilerplate show that does sort of the Fox's idealized propaganda type talking points, because it is essentially a bunch of conservatives over-conservating with each other and a liberal to kind of be a punching bag. The story at number 9 is pretty quick, pretty short, but pretty much gets the point across. Elon Musk tweet challenges Mark Zuckerberg to a fight. We pulled this from USA Today, and it didn't have much in it when we pulled it on Thursday, the 22nd. But the whole point is Elon Musk sent out a tweet to Mark Zuckerberg basically saying he wanted to fight him. He'd do some MMA fight in a cage. They apparently have this thing set. Apparently it's locked down for the Vegas Octagon happening sometime. And Warris wants to try out this movie it's called The Warris, that will he does nothing but basically lies on top of the guy and nothing else, which brought up a whole lot of other jokes that aren't really suitable for this thing, but you can email me. We can do those, personally. Now, we will see how well this thing goes off, if it goes off. In fact, Joe Rogan, I think, wants to train one of the guys to fight the other guy or something like that. This is picking up a lot of steam, and I hope it's not a vaporware-ish of a actual event. This is not Logan Paul or Jake Paul fighting some, washed-up boxer. These are two really nerdy guys that people want to see beat up and would like to see them beat each other up. This story at number 8 got a lot of attention because of a lot of things that happened in the week, the way things were posted. And it's something that was interesting to me, but I didn't think it'd be interesting to many folks. It really rose to the occasion to be number 8 this week. The headline is YouTube TV testing non-sport multi-view streams. Now, YouTube TV is one of our sponsors that we put out every so often because it's the service I've been using for many years when we cut the cord years back. Now, what they're doing now is they're going to do a new surface. They're going to split the screens from up to 5 different sources in the home tab, so you can watch 5 different things or 5 different sources. They tested it over the March Madness time for games on that end, and that worked out very well. I think there were some initial tests inside of college football that probably worked very well as well. And those were things that made perfect sense because you can watch a bunch of games going on a bunch of channels and just going to flip around and see which one's more interesting. This is going to actually allow you to do the multiple streams on an actual TV app as opposed to what I often do when I'm watching on my computer. I'll just put up a couple multiple screens and kind of let that go that way. This is actual multi-screen TVs on the apps and for your smart TVs. Very cool, very good. I'm not sure how interesting it actually is, but you guys thought it was pretty interesting. It's the 8th story of the week. Number 7, a story that probably would have taken up more time if we didn't have, a submersible that got lost under the sea this week. Hawaii volcano stops erupting, putting an end to stunning lava show. There have been, in the last year, probably last 18 months, even more than just 12 months, a lot of activity around Kilauea and just the Hawaiian volcanoes in general. A lot of news talk about what's going on down there, or over there, I guess, based on your perspective. But they declared nearly 2-week eruptions of Kilauea, one of the most active volcanoes in the world, have paused, and a rapid decline of the actual lava activity happening over the afternoon. This posted on Wednesday, the 21st. Some lava continues to flow into the crater floor because it's a volcano, but only small, faint pockets of red could be seen just coming down in the main batches. The second largest volcano in the world erupted from 2021 until last December. That sounds like a lot of time. Then it started erupting again in January, ending in March. Well, there you go. It's been basically spewing out lava pretty consistently since September of 2021. So that's coming on about 2 years worth of full lava eruptions. Always a pretty sight, always a dangerous sight. Usually gets a lot more attention, but we had some other things that sort of pulled in our eyeballs this week. At number 6, a story that's literally a decade in the making. This is a story that was really big back when I was still doing radio, even though it was pretty much stalled back when I was still doing radio about 4 or 5 years ago. The headline reads, pop star Kesha and producer Dr. Luke settle longstanding legal battle over rape defamation. We pulled it from AP News, so it's more or less a source. But the article goes deeper into talking about the beef, which was turned into a couple of lawsuits and countersuits between the artist Kesha and the producer Dr. Luke, settling their lawsuits, with singer saying that only God knows what happened that night, and Dr. Luke saying that he was, quote, absolutely certain that nothing happened. Kesha believes that God thinks something otherwise. The deal between Kesha and her producer averts a trial that had been scheduled for this summer, finally, over allegations that became part of the Me Too cause for Kesha's supporters. The case raised important legal questions about fame and defamation. Of course, it's really deep, going deep into this. It's a lot going into defamation, sexual harassment, all those sort of things, and a lot of things that really aren't the nicer things we talk about in dinner table conversations. Not something that you probably be seeing on the 5 anytime soon. But it's a actually pretty important case when it goes to the remnants of the Me Too movement and just how good people should be treating good people in general. Read the article, go to the links and see the article, go deeper into this. If you remember this, really understand how it works. If you don't remember this, just think of it as the general conversation where it's like, well, what if it's your daughter? It's one of those type of things. You may have to think about it like, well, she's just a pop star and she's doing all this stuff and she's looking all sexy and doing all this stuff on purpose and asking for it. What if it's your daughter? What if it's your sister? What if it's your spouse? You have to think of that way and take into consideration. Yes, there are two sides, but you have to really take this one in a deeper consideration. The number 5 story is a bit of a head scratcher and how we got here, but it's not so much if you've actually been following the group, and it's dealing with the Moms of Liberty. And this specific headline with one specific chapter in Hamilton County, Indiana. So here's your headline. Moms for Liberty Hamilton's County chapter quotes Hitler in first newsletter. The Moms for Liberty national founders Tiffany Justice and Tina DeJoshis responded to the Southern Poverty Law Center's report labeling them an extremist group in its annual reports, which was released earlier this month, which was part of a problem. But why are they being called a extremist group? Well, part of it has to do with the Hamilton County branch in Indianapolis, IN, and what they had an article talking about the Carmel High School Pride Festival and them receiving $10,000 from the It Gets Better project to produce this community-wide Pride Festival, which is maybe an issue. But also, right there as they are promoting that issue, promoting that speech, is a quote from Adolf Hitler. The quote reads, "He alone who owns the youth gains the future," which is both not exactly benevolent and empowering, and to a quote by Adolf Hitler, which kind of tells you where these things are going. When they say the loud parts or the quiet parts out loud, and sometimes don't even know they're doing it, you have a problem. That was your 5th story for the week. Yes, we talked about this one for a bit, and since they're apparently not going anywhere anytime soon, we'll be talking about them for quite some time. No, they are not Mothers Against Drunk Driving. This is not those folks. This is a whole nother level of advocacy, if you will, which is actually just a pure level of crazy from this standpoint. From my standpoint, if you will. Argue with me if you want to via the emails. The next story deals with Elon Musk as it deals with Tesla, his company. It's not very exciting, but it means a lot to a lot of folks because it's about money, pure money. Tesla stock sinks as Barclays says it's time to move to the sidelines. Here is some details from that actual article that was put out. We pulled it from Yahoo Finance, who, of course, they probably aggregated from someplace else at this point, but they're saying this thing from Barclays. On Wednesday, Tesla stock sank 5.5%, its steepest loss in 2 months, after an analyst on Wall Street cautioned it was time to take some money off the table. The analyst cited 3 main points for the downgrade, including an overblown AI effect and uncertain supercharger benefits. Levy, the person who wrote this, believes AI is a long-dated opportunity for Tesla, and the company's charging deals with Ford, GM, and Rivian are more marketing benefits than anything else. Levy also said the biggest factor for the $300 billion run-up on Tesla stock has been its expanding multiples. However, he believes Tesla's near-term fundamentals haven't changed, and the more price cuts may be necessary to make things go. So as you can see from my reading of that very sort of vanilla-ish, and vanilla is very tasty, by the way, vanilla-ish article, Tesla issues are becoming an issue because it's about money. And some of the traders are thinking it's time to look for a better, prettier other stock to deal with. A horrible transition, but I can't not do it. Onto other, better, prettier other stuff. Let's talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene and Boebert. Here is the original article we had, and there's an expansion because it got even worse. Headline reads, Marjorie Taylor Greene calls Lauren Boebert a little bitch on the House floor. The Daily Beast gave us this one. We had an update coming from the Wrap that basically said, yeah, I called her a little bitch, and I'll call her again too. Here's what actually went down. So Marjorie Taylor Greene has been trying to impeach everybody. She's been trying to impeach Joe Biden on whatever made up, trumped up charge that she had. And it's been failing. Or more specifically, they can't take it to a vote to actually push it to do anything because it's been failing. It's really, really, really dumb. While all this has been going on, Adam Schiff was censured this week. And this happened because they were trying to push to censure him for quite some time as well. But a weird little loophole popped up that some other representative used, some other GOP member of the House used, that forced a vote to do it. And when they put it to a vote, they made it happen. So that happened. Because of seeing this bright idea, Lauren Boebert took that same idea, but took what was essentially Marjorie Taylor Greene's full, write up on why to impeach Joe Biden and pushed it to the floor for a vote. Basically, Marjorie Taylor Greene saying that Lauren Boebert stole her homework, wrote her name on it, and sort of did some little teasy thing to sneak it up in front of the teacher so that they saw it first, and it was acted upon, sort of. No, they didn't impeach. They did not impeach Joe Biden, but it actually went to the floor. Because of that, Marjorie Taylor Greene called her a little bitch, and it went back and forth. Now, both of the ladies, in actual terms of being asked by the reporters at Chasing Down the Hall, no commented it. But Marjorie Taylor Greene's staff basically said, oh yeah, she called her a little bitch and she'd do it again too. Double down on the whole fact of that it all happened. One of the most entertaining bits and pieces of legislation this week, even if it was a useless piece of legislation, proving that it's useless legislation, and of course, proving that we get the government we deserve, not necessarily the government that we actually need. And this government is extremely entertaining, but not exactly very effective. The story that made it to number 2 this week is the first of 2 tragedies. The first one is a tragedy that we did talk about a lot, and we talked about this in 3 different cases or 3 different stories. This is the first one we have for the weekend, and it came in coming out of the weekend Sunday itself, as the holiday weekend wasn't even finished, and we were starting to do the count. This headline reads, at least 20 people shot, one fatally at Juneteenth celebration near Chicago. This is one specific Juneteenth celebration. Over 100 people total over the weekend were shot, and the number I have killed, I don't have in front of me. I think it was close to a dozen or so in all the melee. You can follow the link and go deeper into detail into this one in Chicago specifically. But all the shootings, all the activity are essentially mime each other, some sort of celebration, some sort of group activity, and then guns are brandished. People go running around from the gunfire in fear, and some people lose their lives, usually over very small, petty-ish sort of disagreements and misunderstandings. Not necessarily some sort of big type gang thing, but just somebody gets mad at somebody and they pull guns and try to do the bravado and all that stuff. That's essentially how that all played out for the entire weekend. What can we do about it? That's the underlying question of all these things. Weekends seem to be a good time for mass shootings. Holiday weekends means there's an extra day for mass shootings, an extra reason for people to be gathering for things like this. This is not a simple fix. This is not an easy thing to talk about, but it's something that needs to be talked about. Unless we talk about it, we can't fix it. And we have to talk about it and just be ready to just be mad at each other for a little bit. Get steamed, go to our corners, take a breather and come back and deal with it, because these are things that need a little dealing with. It's time for the top story of the week based off the numbers. And normally I'm a little bit more glib and a little bit more flippant in this and talking about putting respect on this story because of the numbers. The numbers are staggering, but the story itself is pretty daunting and soul crushing if it that as well. It also brings up a whole lot of emotions, a whole lot of anger that's popped up on the past end. So let's tell you about the stats of how it got to be where it is, and then we will go into the headline and kind of go as deep as we can with this one. Starting off the fact that the story was, of course, the top story on Twitter for the week with so much response. We're going to this for the quick action from there. It is more responsive than the number 2 story. We just talked about the Juneteenth shootings over the weekend of Chicago specifically by 64%. It is more responsive to the number 204 story, the almost relevant story of the week, by, I can't even read that number, 204,900%. And it took up about a quarter of the engagement for the entire week. 24.64% of all the engagement in all the stories of all the week, all 204 stories, went to this story, this headline, this one right here. The headline reads like this. And unless you were literally, had your head under a pillow and weren't paying attention, you missed all of this action. The pilot and 4 passengers of the Titan submersible are dead, U.S. Coast Guard says. This was pulled from Yahoo News on Thursday the 22nd. And as it read there, as we spent a full week following what we thought was an ordeal between 5 people in a submersible who were looking for the Titanic, hoping that we could find them with 4 days worth of air, only to find out that, oddly enough, they were considered dead. And they probably were considered dead much, much earlier. Not reading from the article here, but sort of riffing for a moment, so bear with me. I won't go too long on this. Essentially, the Titan submersible is a submersible operated by a company called OceanGate. OceanGate Expeditions goes down to deep sea expeditions. Now they're going to the Titanic in a very experimental submersible, to be technical about this. Many people, now we know, had very much issues with the submersible as it was built. Essentially a canister that had a couple video cameras on it, and was, controlled by a game controller. There were laughs and giggles about that, but then of course this happened. The Coast Guard essentially, or I should say the military, using their sub-trackers, heard something that's like an implosion on Sunday, essentially as we lost contact with the submersible. And then he spent the last 4 days looking for them, because they had approximately 4 days of air, only to basically at the fourth day recover pieces of the wreckage, or find it. They haven't recovered it yet. This has brought up a whole lot of talking about why rich people are spending all this money on this stuff. Was it safe? Should they do it? Things like that. There's a lot of discussion to go deeper into that. And this point right now, this podcast, this episode, this piece is not where it's going to happen. We will talk about it in the conversation, going deeper in various pieces along the way. But the number one story for this week is the end of the saga of the Titan submersible owned by OceanGate Expeditions, as we got the news that the 5 people on board, a pilot and 4 passengers, were all confirmed to be dead. And they don't believe, based on where it is, they can even recover any human remains. And that's what we have for the top 10 stories. That's purely the numbers, purely based on what you guys said were the big stories. And we thank you so much for being engaged with everything and giving us a wide range of things. It is becoming increasingly interesting in how the stories, when we take away all of the what's in the day type stuff, what's picking people's eyes, what the shiny objects are that we're putting out there in the daily stuff, what stories actually rise up to the top, as well as the actual top couple of stories every day to give us this thing. Oddly enough, from this, and part of this was because of the way we had working with the loss of our activity on social media, most of these stories are later stories. I mean, there are a few stories from the weekend, but most of the stories are later stories once we reestablish our contact with what's going on. So we implore you to go back to our feeds on Facebook and Twitter. Facebook.com/this is a conversation project, and Twitter.com/th_conversation. And check us out as you're checking your feeds and those things anyway. Like, love, hate, share, engage in the stories that we post every 50 minutes. And the stories that you engage in the most are the ones we'll talk about every single weekday morning, and things you might not have heard. And the ones you really engage in the most are the ones that we get to hear on the weekly wrap up. Coming up in just a bit, we will wrap things up with the stories that weren't quite there, top 11 through 15 stories of the week, and the very, very, very bottom, number 204, the almost relevant story of the week for this week. This is the weekly wrap up for the week ending 24/6/2023, or June 24th, 2023. I'm Jay Cleveland Payne. We'll be right back after this really brief breakaway for, the ads and stuff. This week is a double bonus of me in the sponsorship and the promotions part, because we're going to start off very quickly with me sponsoring me. That being my Business Questions Answered Here brand, another brand under the More Better Media LLC umbrella that does that. Is we answer business questions. We do what we can for business people to kind of bring them together in conversational world, if you will, and give them ways to interact, connect, and sort of get them through some of the basic things. If you're a small business owner or a entrepreneur who's trying to turn it into something more of a business, you might be interested in Business Questions Answered Here. One thing we want you to interest you into is another podcast we have called 2-Minute Business Wisdom. And that podcast now has something to use to promote it, a new book called Simple Tips for Business Success. These are 18 episodes from the 4 years of we produced this podcast that we turned into expanded tips. And so it's one of the tricks I knew I'd use for writing books. I have some sort of podcast or some sort of thing that's a weekly thing that's a producer of something. And then you take certain episodes in certain weeks and just expand on them and turn them into whatever. And you have a perpetuity of different things to actually produce. That's what we have right here. So we have this book out, and as you're hearing this, hopefully you still get a chance to get the Kindle edition for free. We're doing a promotion to up the numbers, if you will, for the Kindle edition of Simple Tips for Business Success. If not, the Kindle edition is running for $2.99 and the paperback is $7.99. We ask you to check it out and see what you think about it. Go to your Amazon.com or go to your Kindle app and search for Simple Tips for Business Success and my name, J. Cleveland Payne. You'll get that. Otherwise, check out the links in the description of this podcast and you will see the link directly to the book. It'd be great if you checked it out. Great if you read it and bought it. Great if you gave a review. But right now, for this week, that's how I get to be a double sponsor, a double promoter, to talk specifically about business questions answered here. That program, the podcast, which is 2-Minute Business Wisdom, which you can find on your podcast apps anywhere, and the book we just released called Simple Tips for Business Success. Check it out and give me a 5-star review today. The Conversation Project is pleased to serve you every single day and every single weekend with great information on news stories that may have been missed because there's a lot of news going on. This week, particularly, as a lot of the eyeballs were covering the war in Ukraine, as it should, and covering the submersible near the Titanic, which some people think maybe it shouldn't. There were a lot of stories that didn't really get a lot of love. Some of them more important than others. Some of them kind of silly. Some of them are just good things that keep kind of in your head for reference going forward. And I do it because I literally am a news person. I'd say former, but formerly getting paid to do it every day. Now as a more or less side business and a overblown hobby. Because I want to see more news coverage and more news stories, I do this to pull as many stories as possible and then see which stories many people engage in. That's how we get the after product of the podcast and the video cast every morning. If you think what we're doing is kind of cool, we ask you to go to our website. This is theconversationproject.com and let us know. You can do this. We need you to do this monetarily. Visit our sponsors page and visit one of our sponsors. We get an affiliate commission from everything you buy from our sponsors. Visit our partnerships page and see if there's a way that you want to partner up with us for consistent income, for lack of a better word. You can do it on a monthly basis, on a scheduled basis. It can be via the Buy Me a Coffee app we have there, or we have links to various other payment options for one-time payments. The most important thing you can do, and it costs you very little except for time, which we appreciate, is follow us on our feeds on Facebook and Twitter, and of course, share the podcast, share the video, share the stuff we have so more people are being a part of this and more engaging. That's it. We want to make this a real worldwide community, and it has been for quite some time, but we want to make it bigger, make it better, and you can help us do that. If you want to partner up with us, that's great. If you want to just share the love with other folks, that's great as well. We just need you to be a part of the whole shebang. So thank you so much for what you can contribute, and just thank you for being you. This week's edition seems to be going a bit long, and that's partially good stuff because I think we're producing better stuff, but we need to work on the script and the pithiness, so we're going to wrap this thing up fairly on the quick to the also rants. Story number 11, and we won't get much context to the next 5 stories because these stories didn't quite make it into the top range, but number 11 headline reads like this: Suspect arrested in quadruple homicide at residence in northern Idaho, authorities say. And no, this is not an update to the other story. This is a totally different story. Check the link and go deeper into this one. At number 12, judge who defied segregationists is honored in Little Rock as a hero. This is a judge that was on the front lines of fighting segregationists who didn't want integration in Little Rock. As a resident of Little Rock for almost 20 years, over 20 years at this point, I've learned the stories of the Little Rock Nine and how they literally broke the color barriers. This is a very, very inspirational story for this judge who they're honoring here now. Number 13, 8th grader who questioned how classmates can identify as a cat called despicable by the teacher, report says. A story that is pretty much a scathing rebuke of the teacher and the question that we all ask: how can people actually identify as a cat? Asked by an 8th grader who actually, did it pretty, she did it pretty well. You might want to check this one out and see what the hype is on all of this identify as cat stuff is going on. At number 14, Supreme Court rules against Navajo Nation in Colorado River water rights case. This is something that's been going on for decades, essentially. And the Supreme Court has finally ruled that the United States does not have a right to protect the Navajo Nation in their rights for the water on the Colorado River. This should be what's all said and done. We shall see going forward. And at number 15, after more than 50 years, The Price is Right leaves its iconic television city studio for a new home. CBS News gave us the article about themselves, and they're leaving for a new home in Glendale, a new smaller studio home, because back in the day, The Price is Right was the showcase hub for the television city tours of the day. And since that's not really the case anymore, they can downsize, they can go to a better, more efficient studio. They can do more stuff in the new studio as well. So it's going to be sort of a teary-eyed leaving of Price is Right. But of course, it itself is not what it used to be. Still a very good show, but once the staple of television watching when you got to stay home from school, no longer on that same level. But we still love some Drew Carey, we still love The Price is Right, and we still love the fact that they still produce this great show. Now, the story no one really cared anything about. At number 204, as we said, this story is 204,900% less engaging than the other one, at 0.01% of all the engagement of everything we had today. Headline reads, Justice Department accuses Minneapolis police of rights violations after George Floyd's killing. So this one you would think would have gotten a bit more love and attention in the process. It just didn't. I'm not sure why no one seemed to care about this one, but the Justice Department has basically finally ruled on how police rights and violations go in Minneapolis, the police for George Floyd's murder in particular, and just how they deal with people in general. And they say that there's some issues with the Minneapolis Police Department. Those issues will hopefully be resolved. Probably not soon, but due to some Justice Department oversight. And so we all can live and sleep a little bit better as we hope that policing gets better. I say we hope, and those are my exact words. Your mission, if you choose to accept, is to look for the Story of the Week podcast coming down about an hour or so after this one gets published, because we got to do editing on all of them. This is going to go deeper in detail of one of the stories I had in the top 10 from the first segment, and the story that we're going deeper into after we reorder them and weigh them down and sort of whittle them off one by one. It's a story that was number 5 this week. That headline reads, Moms for Liberty, Hamilton County chapter quotes Hitler in first newsletter. We'll get a little bit about how that got there. Basically, in the melee going back and forth, this one came up on top, and we will have some words on it, because I have definite thoughts on not only just the fact that the Moms for Liberty is kind of a weird front, but the fact that they're saying the things out loud, and I don't think they even are doing it on purpose, makes a difference. So if you want to get that one, that's in the podcast called The Story of the Week. Look for that one wherever your pods are catched. Anyway, for this one, make sure you're following us on our feeds on Facebook and Twitter so we have things to talk about for the weekly wrap-up, and of course, for things you might have heard every single weekday morning, 5:50 a.m. Central Time, with the live video feed and the podcast and video replays forever. Facebook.com/This Is a Conversation Project, Twitter.com/CH_conversation. Like, love, hate, share, engage in the story so we get what you need to talk about, and we'll talk about them every single day. Make sure you are staying limber, staying on task, and of course, staying hydrated for all the great things we need you to do in this life. And your life is that precious, so stick around. And if you deem us pretty cool, to stop by our website, see if you can support us, and see if you want to support our new book from the other project, that being Simple Tips for Business Success. I'm Jay Cleveland Payne. Email me at jclevelandpayne@gmail.com, or the show specifically at the conversation inbox at gmail.com. We'll see what stories make it through the week, what stories you guys say are conversational, what stories are the pure top 10, pure the data of you next week on the next edition of the weekly wrap-up from the Conversation Project.